And then, yes, thank you. We will have the DAO for Dummies piece, a bit of interview with Jeremy, and after that, we will together in breakout rooms generate questions, and then we go on with the group conversation to learn about DAOs and Sociocratie 3.0. That's how it will look like. But first, as we all have these very different backgrounds, we would love to invite you to make visible what your background is with DAOs mainly. So the invitation is to rename yourself. And if you feel like, I don't know anything, nothing at all about DAOs, to put a number 1 before your name. If you feel like a bit, put a 2. If you say, I know a lot about DAOs, a 3. And if you're in a DAO, you add a 4 to your name. So you just go to your own photo, your own picture on Zoom, you hit rename, and then in my case, it's a bit, so I do number 2. And I rename myself. Is that clear enough? Does anyone need? Yeah. So, and the call will be recorded. If you don't like to be on the screen, you can put your video off, and it will be shared on the Meetup platform for people who have missed it. Jeff, I hand it over to you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna give people a couple more seconds to put the number in front of their name.
Yeah.
I see Eric, Achraf, Sandra's done. Wim still not done.
Wicked. Sandra's dialing it up with me.
And if you can also post it in the chat, and then we can modify it for you, if that's easier.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I think most of you know what's coming up next, but we briefly want to share why we're here. This is one of the S3 meetups we're having. And this is a group of voluntary S3 practitioners in Belgium who are organizing something every month or almost every month. And this is an online edition in English. Last month, we were physically together in Mechelen to learn about deep democracy and sociocracy, and we'll soon be scheduling new meetups for the upcoming months, and we'll alternate between a physical in-person meeting somewhere in the country and online stuff. And Anne and I are part of the meetup host team. We're around 7 people, I think.
Yeah.
And so every time someone different will bring a different topic, also always related to Sociocratie 3.0, but definitely touching on other instruments, models, techniques, and great stuff happening out there in the world. If you're fairly new to Sociocratie 3.0 and you want to learn more, here's a bunch of links. You don't need to remember or copy them. We will be sending out the slides. I won't dig in it too deeply now, but if you need to learn more or want to read further, then some links are coming your way afterwards. I think that's it on the introduction, unless someone is having any practical questions. If so, just shout out. If not, we'll dive straight into the celebrity interview, and our celebrity for today is Jeremy. As Anne explained, we invited Jeremy because he's working in many DAOs at the same time, as he'll explain himself. And so he'll bring a lot of DAO knowledge, and later on in the discussion and the conversation, we'll start interweaving the S3 knowledge and experience in all of us with the DAO experience and insights in Jeremy and all of us to try to learn as much as we can from each other. But first, a 10 to 15 minute celebrity interview, just to get some of the basics and the introduction right. So maybe Jeremy, as a very first question, an obvious one, what the hell is a DAO?
This is the question I've been dreading for days, actually. What is a DAO? Where do I start? So let's start with just the basic definition. DAO is an acronym. It stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. DAO is the term that is sort of used on the internet streets. And what that basically means is, imagine like a random constellation of people. Imagine that if this group or a random Facebook group had a shared bank account, more or less, and decided that oh, we're the Sociocratie 3.0 DAO, and we've pooled together some resources, and we need to decide how we're going to spend that money and what we're going to spend it on and all that stuff. And just like you could imagine, if there was 1,000 Facebook groups with a shared bank account, they would be organized around tons of different topics, and they would also figure out lots of different ways to organize themselves to figure out what they were going to do and how they were going to use that money towards that goal. And so some DAOs are what you would consider more of like a hard DAO, and they use blockchain technology to vote and make decisions about how they're going to spend that money. And then there's also a lot of what we call soft DAOs that use either some form of tool or the relational field as their decision-making process and decision-making vehicle. So, if we can get the group of humans to decide, we should do this, then that's good enough. It's a soft vote here in the call. And, if everybody gives thumbs up, then all right, let's spend some money and do some awesome stuff together. So that would be, that's my DAO definition for dummies. Random Facebook group, just imagine that with a shared bank account trying to do stuff.
But the shared bank account isn't in euros, I assume.
Often not, right? So some DAOs do have a legal status, and that legal status does enable them to hold funds and to get a bank account. Many, and what I would say most DAOs are of spurious or sketchy legal status. But technically nothing can stop any group or any individual from holding resources in cryptocurrency on a blockchain. And I'm not even going to begin to try and explain that crap. Google it, deal with it.
All right. Could you dig into the word autonomous a bit more? How does that translate in a DAO? What does it mean?
Sure. So, I mean, like a Facebook group, like any random constellations of individuals on the internet, there's usually some content, some topic, some subject matter, something that sort of brings those folks together, a shared interest. And sometimes that shared interest can be a project, like we want to make something together. Or we want to just, put together a book club and learn about some stuff together. And so the autonomy in that is just
builder trend from your external calendar.
Truly. So the autonomous is more of a reference to the fact that in a lot of these different groups, there is not like a firm hierarchy of like, hey, I'm in charge of the group and of that bank account. It really has this element of kind of being like the wild, wild west. And, hey, we are this random constellation of people, and we have to figure out together how we're going to do anything. And that autonomy just sort of points at the fact that we're leaning into non-hierarchy, and that especially this aspect of self-determination, right? So we as a group get to decide where we go, how we do things, and that's about it.
All right. Maybe an example would help. So as you're part of many DAOs, could you pick one that is important, but also, what's the word, exemplary, tell us a bit more in detail how it works?
Yeah, for sure. So the first DAO I ever started contributing to is called the Token Engineering Commons, and they exist. The content or subject matter that they're interested in is the field of token engineering, which is super technical, but tokens. I guess we're going to have to do it. So tokens, digital poker chips, right? A lot of people think of it as digital money, which I think is a sort of narrowing frame. But if you imagine a digital poker chip, and you would go, okay, poker, I understand that game, but not poker. A poker chip is of indeterminate value. But let's just imagine that the game that we're playing is actually one that we get to create together. And so since we, the players, get to create the game, what that poker chip does and how it works and what it's worth is just one big question mark that is determined by the project that we're working together on and us as players. And so the way in which you set up that rule set around that poker chip is called the field of token engineering. And token engineering is extraordinarily multidisciplinary because there's a technical side of which everybody's sort of familiar, like you need coders and nerds to be able to build the stuff. But those nerds need people with social skills. They need people with complex system dynamics background. They need people that can help manage the project. They need people of every way, shape, form, and sort to help them decide what are good rules for the game that we're trying to make. And so that field is called token engineering, the study of what good rules are and how we set up those rules. And since, as you can imagine, in this space, that is kind of a superpower, like how to create the rules of the game. The group that is the Token Engineering Commons came to the conclusion very early in this DAOing space that actually everybody needs to have that information. It needs to be a common good that is widely available. And so that's why the DAO that is the Token Engineering Commons is also organized as a commons, as a common good, to be exclusive, and also non-rivalrous in nature. And so that DAO, oh my God, I've been explaining so long. What was the question again, Jeff? Oh God.
An example.
So you're in that DAO, you want to participate.
Yeah.
How does that work? How do you get together? How do you make decisions? How do you even know who's in there and who's doing what?
Oh, those are complicated questions. Oh my God.
The questions are not so hard, but
the answer is very, very complicated. So in terms of most DAOs, what you'll find is there's some form of messaging platform. In this instance, the Token Engineering Commons lives for the most part on Discord. I can show you the Discord because why not? It's exciting. Not really, but let's find Discord. So this is my Discord. So I collaborate on a shit ton of DAOs. These are all DAOs, different random constellations of people with a shared bank account. The Token Engineering Commons is here. And let's dismiss that. And what you just see is a Discord server. It's like Slack. It's just a messaging platform. It's got a whole bunch of rooms allocated towards working groups. And they have different voice channels where there's calls happening right now that are being recorded. So if you wanted to contribute to this DAO, you would basically go to their website, the token tec.something.org.commons. I don't know, the Token Engineering Commons. You would Google that. And on the website, there would be a link into this Discord channel. And once you get into the Discord, you would introduce yourself. You start to poke around the space and see what's going on. This DAO is one of the more organized DAOs. They are built, they have a social or cultural build based on Eleanor Ostrom's principles of managing the commons. Another deep rabbit hole that I would encourage everybody to jump down. And the way that they sort of do the decision-making in governments, so the conversation for the most part happens here. If you wanted to, though, actually get something done and spend some money, for example, from the DAO, what we would do is go not here, but to a different place that I am scrambling to get to after I move that bar. You would actually go into the forum. So the Token Engineering Commons has a forum. As you can imagine, Discord, lots of chatter, lots of operationally stuff. But if you want to actually float an idea out there, then you would go to the forum. That's where the idea discussion about proposals happens. And as you can see, there's some information right here at the beginning of the forum. The Token Engineering Commons uses the advice process. They use an on-chain governance process called conviction voting. Conviction voting very simply just says, if you put a vote on an idea or on a proposal, the longer your vote stays there, the more conviction you have for the idea, and that sort of actually grows because there's a bit of an opportunity cost. If I can only vote on one proposal with one token at a time, so if I'm going to keep my idea there and wait for other people to sort of get drawn into what I think is a good idea, my conviction sort of grows and has a weight to it. And a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you wanted to float an idea into the Token Engineering Commons, you would use the advice process. You would ask somebody who has expertise in the domain that you're interested in. You would ask somebody who is impacted in the domain that you're interested in, and then you would create a proposal and put it here in the forum. So this is a live proposal for the Token Engineering Commons around Gravity DAO. Gravity DAO is a sort of sub DAO that exists to do dispute resolution amongst DAOs. And it satisfies one of Eleanor Ostrom's 8 principles of managing the commons, which is you need to have dispute resolution available at low cost to people because disputes are a fact of life. And if you don't have a way to deal with that, shit blows up super fast. So this is a funding proposal for Gravity DAO from the Token Engineering Commons. And this is just to say, hey, this is what we're thinking. And if you've got thoughts on it, come join the action, join the conversation, and discuss what you think of the proposal here. And after that sort of advice process happens here on the forum. Looks like there's no comments on that proposal, oddly enough. After it goes for advice here up on the forum, we would move it over to the Gardens. And the Gardens is where the on-chain actual voting mechanism happens. And this is the previous proposal for funding from Gravity DAO that we passed about 6 months ago. As you can see, the request was for 50,000 wrapped XDAI. XDAI is a stable coin that just basically means dollars. So $51,000 was the cost of the proposal. And you can see that the proposal was basically just copy pasted here. And you can also see how the voting itself was done. My face is in the way, but you can see that the proposal was supported by a number of different players. Big players supported the proposal quite a lot, and several other players sort of added their conviction into passing this proposal. And back in the day, 6 months ago, 51,000 wrapped XDAI was transferred from the main account from the Token Engineering Commons over into Gravity DAO to fund the dispute resolution arm of Gravity. And so that was... So
do I understand it precisely that it's kind of a working group that then gets those 51,000 whatever, forgot the name, to execute a project?
Precisely, yeah. And you can see that was 51,000 out of the total of about $650,000 that this DAO is maintaining.
And does everyone have to vote, or is it because it seems like a small number of people that voted for?
Yeah, so in this instance, it describes how many tokens are required. So this DAO has 2 different tokens. It has both a token that has an economic cost, which is basically, I would describe it as your support of the project. So if you wanted to fund the project that is distributing knowledge about token engineering to the whole world, you could buy the Token Engineering Commons token, and that would act as you financing the project. It would put some money into the common pool of the DAO, but it would also act as a way of sort of speculating, oddly enough, that the project of distributing knowledge around token engineering that is a good project, that is actually going to be successful, because that token can rise in value. So you can also look at it as kind of like owning a share of the project itself. That token, and this is also gives you access to a different token, which is called Trust. Trust is a governance token. It means you can't buy or sell the governance token, but the governance token does allow you to support different proposals here in the garden, in the gardens. And so what you can see is that, yes, a few people supported the proposal, but they also used a lot of tokens. So they used a lot of their governance authority to point at this idea and say, yes, this is worth doing. This helps us finish our project. So let's make that happen. And it's less important in this instance, the amount of people that support the proposal, but the amount of governance that those people hold. So you can look at it as like people that have a lot of experience in the project. They've been active in it for a long time. You can think of it as people that are like have very high value alignment or interest in the success of the proposal, you know, who have a lot of skin in the game, have decided, yeah, that's worth doing.
All right.
It's not, well, maybe
it's complicated for sure.
Yeah, it's complicated.
All right. But maybe this is enough as an introduction. It's like it's showing us that there's a whole big world out there which we don't know much of, but we get some insight now.
Yeah. I'm wondering if the difference between cryptocurrency and the token is like clear enough, because both sound like invented money.
Yeah, I mean, so tokens are a big category, like without getting into too much, too much.
2 minutes.
Like you can think about tokens as, for sure, it's just a measuring stick. So that measuring stick could be some form of measurement of economic value. It could be a measuring stick of governance authority. It could be a measuring stick. I know of projects that are literally designed to measure the flow of water in a river, right? So tokens are just a very fancy digital way of measuring shit.
But every DAO has a token?
No, not.
Okay.
No. So there's also DAOs, like one of the DAOs I'm the most actively contributing to is Regens Unite. We are barely a DAO in that we're a DAO because all our finances are managed in cryptocurrency, and we receive donations to fund our operations in cryptocurrency, but we don't have a token. We also don't do any form of on-chain voting or governance. There are sort of 15 core contributors in our group, and we do all of our voting is basically on video calls in the social layer. So we would be some people would say that's not a real DAO, and I would say fuck them. Like, what's a real DAO? But you know, we're just a group of people that are trying to do something, and we're leveraging this technology to enable us to do it.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Are there examples that can be used by normal people instead of technical guys?
Yeah, I would say Regens Unite has a relatively non-technical, extraordinarily non-technical example. So our hypothesis is that there's a lot of people doing work that we would describe as regenerative in nature. And that could be regenerative on a personal level, helping people sort of heal trauma and be nicer to themselves and each other. Regenerative in the sense of community, because I don't know about you, I live in a big city and I'm still, not on first name basis with all of my neighbors. So like there's this idea of like reinventing community or relearning community that is sort of up for recreation. And there's also people doing work in terms of the actual physical regeneration of the biosphere, like bringing dead rivers back to life through reforestation. All of this work, we think, shares a common theme that is trying to reinvent a more pro-social culture. And we think that basically people in these different spaces doing these different types of work would do well to be better networked together so that they can support one another and recognize that that work that is regenerative in nature is actually connected by a common theme. So if you're doing regenerative work, you're not just a lonely fighter in your corner of the world, but you're actually part of this much larger movement. And we can learn and support learn together and support one another. So we organize in-person events to build that social layer, to build trust and relationships across people that may not talk to one another, that may have judgments about one another. And that's it. That's the scope of our project. And what makes us a DAO, like I said, is that all of our funding is basically received in cryptocurrency through a very interesting tool called Gitcoin Grants. I don't know if we have time to talk about that, but Gitcoin Grants is awesome. It's a whole rabbit hole all by itself.
Yeah, I guess that would lead us too far from now, at least. Yeah. All right, let's wrap up this first introduction bit. I think that's more than enough information to start reflecting and thinking. Don't you guys think? Or are there any other questions remaining?
We would like to now invite you into breakout rooms to generate questions, actually. And to make the bridge with Sociocratie 3.0, our question would be, what are the most important problems and challenges you expect to arise in a DAO? And that would be the main conversation after the breakout rooms. But if there's anything now that feels like urgent to have clarity, please tell.
Any questions?
Yes, a lot.
Is the assignment clear? So you'll get in a breakout room with probably 3 people, maybe 4, together digesting what Jeremy just said a bit, reflecting on it and coming up with, just as Anne said, and which is also in the chat in the meantime, what are the most important problems and challenges you expect to happen in a DAO?
Yeah, and the invitation is to have like 1 or at most 2 maybe per group. Like to have.
What is your top 2
so that that we start
problems
with
or challenges? Yeah, and what we'll try to do afterwards is pick all your top 1 or 2 challenges and then try to see whether or not, and if so, how Sociocratie 3.0 can help tackle those problems. If that's possible. And that's the way we'll start linking Sociocracy with DAOs and see whether and how they can help each other. That's why we're inviting you to come up with challenges or problems you expect to happen to see whether or not we could learn something from each other here. Clear?
Yeah. And also in case if it isn't fully clear yet, just do your best attempt. And if it happens to not be a problem or challenge in a DAO, it's good enough as well, then we can clarify it further and learn together.
We're going to open up the breakout rooms for around 10 minutes. Make sure you remember your top 1 or 2 problems, because when you get back into the main room, we'll ask you to put them in the chat. If you put them in the breakout room chat, we won't be able to read it, so you have to keep them until we're all back into the main room here. All right, let's go. Let's get started. All right. right, maybe we can pause the recording here.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Jeremy, you need to.
We're back.
Hello, hello, welcome back.
I am.
So we invite you to share your questions and your question. Actually, we shall start.
Handig, we horen u niet.
Je hoort mij niet.
Oh, yeah. Can you
Nu
hear?
wel,
Can you hear me?
nu wel.
Okay.
Ja, ja.
Oh, yeah. So maybe the 3 breakout rooms can post the questions in the chat and then we can go through them room by room. Maybe we just take one question from each room.
Yeah.
So sort them in priority or challenge or problem, because we also now want to lean in to what can Sociocratie 3.0 offer to this DAO space.
Mm-hmm. And Jesper and Rudy already copied their problems in the chat, so please follow their example.
Yeah. So we can start with the first one already, and that is.
Maybe we should give people some time so they can.
Good as well.
Yeah. So Paul's group was about how do we trust each other? And you were also discussing the fairness later on, weren't you, about?
Yeah, the governance tokens could create kind of a hierarchy, but one is more important than the other because they have more governance tokens.
Yeah.
But later on, we also understood that that's just the way that it was organized in the token engineering commons. So you make up your own rules. So it could also be something else. But this is what we saw, at least in this group.
Yeah. All right, great. And Jesper and Rudy came up with clear decision-making options and following implications. And how do we align on the purpose of the DAO? And does a contributor understand what the DAO is trying to build or achieve? And another one is governance of the DAO. How do we prevent authoritarian governance while at the same time preventing new joiners to affect governance decisions adversely? Great questions. Are any more questions coming up? Jeremy, maybe you could already run through the questions and see whether you see any logical order to start answering them, because one answer might inform a next one. Any more questions?
I mean, big, hairy questions like how do you align on the purpose of the DAO, and how does a contributor understand what a DAO is trying to achieve? That one seems like the most essential place to start.
Yeah,
and
great.
This question around governance seems like a good place to sort of start to flow from there.
All right. So let's just start the conversation around this question. So Jeremy, you take the lead, but all of us could put sub questions or comments in the chat. Anna and I will keep an eye on the chat. And this will spend between 5 or 10 minutes on this question or until we reach some endpoint there.
Yeah, and so I think in this sort of phase of the conversation, now that we have some laundry list of possible anti-patterns or challenges, problems, like what I would really like to focus everybody's attention on is what are the patterns that we know of in S3 that can help us address these likely and plausible challenges. And I will say this first one around, how do we align on purpose and ensuring that contributors understanding it, like that's where everything starts, right? And that is extraordinarily actual in a very wide variety of contexts. So what patterns in S3 can help us align on purpose?
Does anyone have any ideas? There's people knowing S3 in the room. So what would you pick out of the S3 collection of patterns to help with this?
to describe the domain. What's your domain of responsibilities? What's the domain that you're working on?
Bingo. No.
Yeah.
But to me, the domain is a response to a driver, right? So I would start with
Yes.
driver mapping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily driver mapping, but definitely the
Yeah,
driver.
you're defining the drivers, and driver
Yeah.
mapping workshop could just be one way
Yeah,
of doing it.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Is everyone familiar with the word driver and domain? If not, please shout out so we can also help understand. Ulrich. So who's explaining what a driver is? Who summarizes that? Just take a try.
It's a bit weird that you asked the question, Jeff.
I know, but it's typically a way to learn more, right? Instead of hearing always the same definition from the same guy.
Yeah. If nobody wants to have a go, I'll have a go. But
go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. The drivers actually build up in four parts. First one is, what do you see? And the objective, if you look at things objectively, what is it that you see? And the second one is, when you see that, what is happening? Why is it a problem, or what is it that you then see happening there? And this from the objective to what is the result of that? And the third one is, what is the intention then? What is the direction to get out of this this situation? And what is the direction that you want to give to the next step to get out of this? And the fourth one is to describe the future that you would like to see. So not the solution, but the direction of the future that you would like to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the driver statement in part.
Yeah,
so
correct.
maybe somebody can.
Yeah, and so by answering these four questions, you kind of write down a motivation or a purpose or a mission. We would also call it a creative tension, because you get more clarity on where are we today and where do we want to be in the future. So the driver is just a template, let's say, to get really clear on this. And typically together with a driver, people also draw up evaluation criteria and an evaluation cycle or mechanism. Like, how are we gonna know, see, observe, measure that we're successful? And so when I would kind of walk into a DAO to collaborate, I would look for that. What's their driver and how are they measuring success? Do you see anything of that or something similar being used in DAOs, Jeremy? Like a mission statement, or how does that work?
Yeah, for sure. So I would go to the example of Regions Unite, since that's the project that I've been in since its inception. And so we created effectively like our sort of purpose statement and our laundry list of principles. Mm-hmm. Like, so our principles sort of moves in similar direction to evaluation criteria, but I would say more in the direction of like target states of being, like less evaluation criteria, but like this is the vibe that we're certainly going for. Yeah. And using those, I would also say that sort of my primary toolkit that I use is liberating structures. Uh-huh. And so the patterns that seem very similar in what you guys are describing would be one called 9 Whys, which is just this continuous inquiry in sort of mapping out the constellation of significance around any motivating factor. And I'm very partial to like the strategizer test card model. You know, we believe WXYZ, so we're going to try X, and you know, we're going to take a look at, you know, A, B, and C as far as, you know, whether or not those indicators of success. And I also really enjoy a null hypothesis. So if I'm wrong about this, what might be the things that I would expect to see for failure states?
Yeah, great. Yeah, those are indeed great tools as well. Someone mentioned domain as a possible pattern to help. which is extending the driver with other interesting stuff, such as what are our core responsibilities, what are boundaries, so what are we not doing, so what is out of scope for this DAO in this case, also which skills or experience or knowledge is required. And it also again stresses the evaluation mechanism and criteria. Yeah. All right, is that enough on this first question, or is there anything you want to add, Jeremy?
I would say that I would encourage more DAOs to make use of domain clarification.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, invariably, there is a tendency to keep things sort of loose. And since these are volunteer armies, another way of looking at it, like it's very challenging for these groups to decide what's out of scope, especially. So using a tool that is very rigorous in coming to a description about, hey, you know, what is this thing? You know, and this idea, a collaborator in greater than, which is kind of a DAO, has a lot of S3 practitioners and liberating structures practitioners, a lot of self-organization heroes in that group. Just had an interesting write-up that as soon as an initiative has a name, you create a boundary. And so just defining those boundaries well could be super helpful, just in you know, knowing what part of the soup you're in.
Okay, great. Maybe the next couple of questions are about preventing new joiners to affect governance decisions adversely, which kind of links with how to deal with toxic or bad actors, or doesn't it? Anything to say about that, Jeremy?
Let me go back to the question itself. So the question was governance and DAO. Yeah, how do we prevent? Nope, that was a different question. How do we deal with toxic or bad actors?
Maybe a question to Paul. Does this link to the trust question you have?
This question was not from our group, at least, so I wouldn't know.
Okay, yeah.
So the one who posted this question, I think, is the one to explain what they meant.
Yeah, sure, and me and Rudy can probably do that if it's unclear. So I mean, I don't think we fully got everything that you explained, Jeremy, on the trust and how it worked. But anyway, we were sort of clear on the fundamental challenge of, okay, how do we do governance in a good way, where we don't end up with an authoritarian style. On the other hand, having people just joining and leaving could be problematic as well. So that was like the fundamental challenge. I don't know, Rudy, you please fill in.
No, it's that's what we discussed here.
Okay, great. What's your first thoughts, Jeremy?
Yeah, this is extraordinarily relevant because as open and porous as most of these boundaries are, like contributors come and it costs a lot of energy to onboard people into the context, and they can offboard just as quickly. Like these are again volunteer groups, so that's not like there's any contract or any obligation for people once they have been onboarded to hang out and stay around. So a very relevant challenge. So what comes to mind for me is actually this sort of wicked question, this paradox, you know, how is it at one time we are sort of open and inclusive, but also, you know, we have sort of clear, we also have some form of membrane that, you know, allows us to concentrate and pool our energy and resources, where it sort of is going to have staying power at the same time.
Maybe then as a question, it's one thing if somebody steps in, but just listens and doesn't actively contribute. you can say, okay, well, that reason doesn't bother us because nothing it breaks. But a toxic behavior could be that somebody enters and actually breaks down what has been built up by the people who had good intentions. So what about that? I think that was also the question. Yeah, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, can you be kicked out of a DAO, for instance, if you don't behave, or how does that work?
Totally. I mean, the exclusion and scapegoating dynamics can be vicious in these contexts as well, right? You know, again, it's just you're in some places, you like in the token engineering commons, it is the case where you have a pretty well-defined dispute resolution and arbitration process, and that could go to some form of like judgment mechanism. But in a lot of contexts, that's not defined whatsoever. So if you sort of run afoul of a person who happens to have high influence, like, then yeah, coercive dynamics can for sure pop up. So what patterns come to mind to help us address these things?
Can I ask something that can also be connected to the previous question? Like, if new people are coming, maybe they also, it's possible that they bring some new direction to this DAO. Like, how is it fixed, this domain it's set up in the beginning and it doesn't change, or is it how does it?
I would say mostly far in the opposite. It is so dynamic. It is it can have the feeling of schizophrenia, right? As you described, as every new person that comes in has new ideas, new energy, new information that will, you know, that just like, oh yeah, well, what you guys are doing is fine and good, but this new feature, this new direction, like, to integrate all of that and all of that energy is, I would say, more the challenge, and rather than jumping from new thing to new thing. So I noticed though that we're sort of stacking like lots of different challenges together. If we go back to like the root of this line of inquiry, and then we can unpack these sort of one at a time. You know, around this idea of governance and preventing new joiners from maybe stupidly or maliciously to influence that decision-making process. What patterns come to mind to help us address it?
Is there anything obvious someone thinks about? One of the S3 patterns?
But I got the question in that direction, Jeff. Can you know your identity, who is a member of the DAO, or can you be anonymous? Is there some identification, or can I say I am Vladimir Putin and joining the DAOs?
Yeah, pseudo anonymity is very popular in many DAOs. So that would lead you to not be able to verify the identity of any contributor.
Okay, yeah. I've worked with a couple of teams. They were not working online in what we would call a DAO, but as part of their domain description, they had included a part, like a little chapter of how do we behave here. And it's an agreement they kind of made together with also evaluation criteria. And that kind of helped newcomers to also learn about not only what is the purpose of this group, but also how am I supposed to behave here? And how does governance work, etc. So I guess kind of a manual for how do we do things together here might help. It's not literally an S3 pattern, but they include it in the domain description.
It can be a bit role description.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You could consider DAO member to be a role and then describe what is expected from people. Definitely. Yeah. I also think that consent decision making might.
So for membership, DAOs, they use digital identities and verify
Wim, we can't hear you well, Wim.
Okay.
No, it's
Your voice is all cracked up. So maybe throw your question in the chat. Oh, we really can't hear you. There's, I guess, something wrong with your microphone or so. Throw your question in the chat, please, Wim. Yeah.
So consent decision making is something that you see as a pattern that could help, Jeff.
Yeah, well, the big difference I see is when I'm in a DAO and for whatever reason I manage to get more governance tokens, I have influence without needing to argue or to bring any valid arguments. While in consent decision making, there is no such thing as more or less power. There's equivalence, and the power is not with the people or not with any tokens or money or status they hold, but it is with the arguments they bring. So if a newcomer would come in and bring adverse ideas or silly things into a decision making, their objections would just not get validated or qualified through the process.
In addition to that, maybe also the navigate via attention is also one of the patterns that could work. Because if you follow navigate via attention and there's only one who sees attention, it's not attention of the group, so you stop right there, right?
Yeah. Is everyone clear on how that would work? Or should Paul explain a bit more? They're all good on this?
Navigate by attention. Can you unpack that for me?
Oh, yes, I can. Well, actually, that's where it all starts. If all goes well, then you can just sit back and relax and enjoy an organization working flawlessly. But when there's tension, then something needs to change. And there's always one person who sees that and addresses it to the rest of the group. If that one person is on his own and he's the only one who sees that there's a problem, then it's not the problem of the group, then it's the problem of the person. Then you can just deal with it yourself and basically find other ways to contribute. But it's not the group who's taking that tension as a starting point to change things or to come with proposals that change your governance or change your way of working.
Yeah, definitely. And I also want to link this, Paul, to what Roberto just put into the chat. He said structuring in circles could be a way of solving this. And that's what S3 is inviting, to create clear small domains, which are either held by one person in a role or a small team of, I don't know, 5 to 12 people in a circle. And we typically don't work with much larger groups together. So there's teams. And if a team becomes too big, we need to split it up into sub-teams or sub-circles. And every circle has a governance and an operations backlog. So a list of things they need to build and deliver, and a list of things they should improve, let's say. And so if a newcomer would put attention on a backlog, then he would have to prioritize that together with the team, unless he got selected into a role and he can do it all by himself. But to get selected into a role also happens in consent too. So probably a newcomer won't easily be selected in an impactful role early on. So that's where the group process helps to filter out these things and to prioritize with the team. So to throw that back on you, Jeremy, do you see DAOs being organized as nested circles and teams, or are it just random groups of people working on random stuff, or how does that work?
So yes, all of the above. I mean, it depends. It's a huge space, right? So in every way you can imagine, right? The Regions Unite uses sort of nested circles. We have a set of sort of core contributors, and then we have we organize events in different locations. So you'll have a squad that is sort of bearing the responsibility for the organization, for example, of a previous event we did in Bogota in Colombia. And, within that squad, there's different responsibilities, around finance, around facilitation, around logistics and organizing volunteers. All of these are sort of happening in, over there. I came to the event in Bogota as just a facilitator, with my facilitator skills, and they had arranged literally everything else. And I was able to just come in and do my part of the job, so to speak. So yeah, but in other places, like it may be extraordinarily poorly defined. So it varies, but I can see that as being a good pattern to make use of that could help solve that problem. I do have questions. I don't actually have questions, but I do want to tease you guys out and get some more information about consent decision making.
All right. How do we trigger this? You are familiar with consent decision making, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, we use it in Regions Unite, but it's such a powerful pattern. I'd love somebody else to give us the game.
Well, maybe I'll summarize it and then we see what add-ons pop up or what questions are triggered. So in consent, we start from equivalence, which is different from being equal. So equivalence means that all voices are heard. We do that by typically starting from a proposal. So it's important to first start with a good driver, so everyone's clear on the why. Why are we agreeing something or changing something or doing something? And then a conscious decision to either co-create a proposal or have one person come up with a proposal because he or she is an expert. And then the relevant group, which typically is a circle, who owns a certain small domain, gets together to consent on the proposal. And consenting means that there's no more objections to the proposal. And an objection is not just me saying, I don't like it. It's me bringing arguments, or reasons, or information that shows that the proposal is not good enough or safe enough to try, that it might harm the system or trigger undesired consequences. I also might object if I see a significant, really worthwhile improvement, not a tiny bit of improvement here and there, but something big, also a reason for objection. But the first thing that will happen is that the group, you helped by the process, will qualify my objection and see whether they first understand the argument I bring and then don't disagree with it. And only if my argument gets validated, I have a qualified objection, and then we're going to change the proposal. So if I just say I need the blue to be a little bit more dark without having any argument, that's not an objection. That's just my preference, which is not valid as an objection. I think the biggest difference here is that DAOs might not always be organized in small teams who can get together to do consent decision making. So there's also the question of how do we harvest objections in larger groups, which can happen asynchronously and using online tools. No problem with that. But also equivalence, as in if I have more governance tokens, I have more of a voice. So how does that work? And I guess that I at least feel some incompatibility there, because whether I have 1 token or 5,000 doesn't mean shit for consent decision making. I first need to bring my argument and get it validated by the group. Any first thoughts on that, or comments or disagreements?
Well, I think that's quite relevant because the internet is all about distribution. It's decentralized. So I'm online, you're offline at the moment that I think about something and I want to. So that how do we organize that? Maybe we're in different time zones all the time, which makes it hard to be online together, for instance. So that kind of organization is a really interesting topic, I think, for consent decision making.
Yeah. I've seen situations where the whole process runs online or on documents in the cloud and asynchronously, but you need a clear process like, hey guys, this is a driver, 2 days to bring any objections to the driver. And then we select maybe 5 or 6 or whatever amount of people to co-create a proposal. They need to have a proposal done by next month. And then everyone gets to see the proposal transparently, and then they maybe get 1 week to bring in objections. And then it takes more time, of course, but this allows a large amount of people to bring in objections and concerns. And typically they're ordered and prioritized, and the proposal gets adapted a couple of times until there's no more objections. Yeah. The other approach could be that you work with delegates, representatives, like one person from each circle or big group or part of the game, join together in an online call or physically to do consent decision making, which is then probably faster, but they do need to represent their entire circle or team or background.
Yeah, and what this really brings to the foreground is actually, in my less than humble opinion, it's actually the process before we get to a proposal that is actually the most essential. Right, the way in which we make a decision on that proposal is a godlike power, right? The ability to form the idea and frame the choice that others get to make actually has an enormous amount of authority. So to have rigorous process and inclusive participation so that we can come with proposals that, you know, by the time we've gotten here, like we're so like, yes, of course we're doing this, like end of conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Did you see any great examples on how that could work?
I mean, I don't know if we're a great example, but the example that we find functional is like we use consent decision making. So you know Anna Marie, right? You know, Miss Swan. So you know she hangs out with you nerds. She's been a core contributor for Regions Unite since we got started. So she's really helped to sort of bring that type of rigor. In addition to her presence, like we also have Lean Self Out, which is like she's a deep democracy trainer, as well as me with my liberating structures. So like our recipe for success is just maximize process mindfulness and facilitation, and then everything sort of has a tendency to work out. I don't know. I would definitely recommend like having, you know, 3 facilitators in every circle. That would probably make your life way easier.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Great. Well, keeping an eye on time, I still want to throw in Wim's question. I hope someone understands the question. He says, so DAOs membership do not use DIDs or VCs? Question mark.
Yeah.
Do you understand, Jeremy?
So VCs doesn't ring any immediate bells. DIDs is distributed identity.
Okay.
So for sure. So this is kind of a subcategory that is a whole can of worms around identity and, you know, who is who, and understanding sort of who has the right to have a say in your group, right? So some DAOs are huge. Like if you take Uniswap, Uniswap as a DAO at one point had a treasury, a shared bank account of like $2 billion. So like the amount of people that are holding tokens and have the ability to direct the flow of those resources. I mean, we're talking about like corporate class of like volumes of human beings that can participate there. For the most part, I would say for very technical projects, yeah, you might have some form of distributed identifier, but you're more than likely, like, it's really just token holders. Like however somebody can figure out a way to get the governance authority into their hands, and that has like that has like terrifying implications, like because literally like you can go to some DAOs and you can rent governance authority. Like you can just borrow it, which means I could borrow enough money to rent enough governance authority and, you know, attack the DAO and drain the entire treasury. This is stuff that happens, right? So no, not for the most part. Like this idea of identity and permissions is actually a very sort of cutting edge, like, oh shit, we have a problem, how do we deal with it type of thing.
Yeah.
And in that keeping, you know, are there any patterns in S3 that you can think of that might help us address that type of stuff?
Nothing we didn't say before, in the sense that true equivalence does mean that not one person has more voting power than another one has, right? So these are two conflicting mechanisms in my perspective. Yeah.
Well, there are DAOs that have arranged governance along this sort of classic democratic idea of one person, one vote. But also, again, coming back to this idea of like it being the content of your argument that is actually the influencer. That's still like a lot of this stuff. Another question that popped up is also very dear to my heart. Just the notion that is trust, right? So even in these highly organized, very technical token voting environments, like so much continues to happen in the social layer, right? In, you know, whether you call it, you know, the layer 0 is kind of the way the nerds refer to it, in the human cultural layer, like so much action happens there. So I notice I have some energy to like point at that question of trust and go, like, again, like what patterns might we be able to pull from that could help us like build trust in these potentially anonymous environments? What's up, Anne?
Yeah, I would like to jump in and say that it's 9 and that some people might want to leave. We have half an hour more for whoever would like to stay and continue about these topics, or be in a breakout room with someone you know, whatever you would like. But for now, I want to give people the chance to leave. And it would be nice if you can leave saying like one thing that you learned in this call, so that we have a sense of.
So what is one thing you learned, or one question that you want to explore further? Because that could also be one of the outcomes of this call, of course. Who goes first?
I can go. I have to leave, unfortunately. What do I take away? I'm thinking that moving all the way back to the Sociocratic circle method and now into S3, it is a bit challenged by the new things that DAOs and the online space bring. So I think there are a lot of new challenges and questions that we haven't really thought about because they weren't relevant. So it's a super interesting space, and some things are really applicable, but again, Jeremy, for some of the things that you're asking for patterns for, I'm not sure that you're going to find them. There's probably a good way to move from the foundational principles into maybe new patterns that could help. But I think that's our work to figure that out in the future. So that's what I'm taking with me, actually.
Great. Thanks, Jesper. Anyone else?
Maybe from my side, I will also leave. Very interesting and thought-provoking. I will have to do some reading apparently. What I liked basically for myself was that this discussion and this information always seemed applicable to something more technical or object-oriented group, something like, I don't know, like open source software, which is kind of clear for what's going on. But yes, I will try to take all this information and put them into my personal experience with groups that have less, I don't know, maybe more social objectives or more vague objectives, and see how it fits. And somehow, you know, you go along and you never reflect on how the group operates, and at some point after a few years kind of falls apart and you don't know how. Or some people like dominate suddenly, and then it changes the nature of the how it started. And yes, I think it's very interesting.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else who likes to share a learning?
It's not maybe learning, but what I want to explore more is the thing that you have the subgrouping. That's really in my interest. I give you an example. If you have a certain driver you can work on, and you get the results of that driver, how can you incorporate the end-to-end process into a DAO? For instance, you have to make or to sort out a driver. Yeah? You work on a driver. You have a proposal. That proposal you can work out. And how can you see the result? So end-to-end into the DAO. Maybe a simple example, if you say, okay, we are going to invest, for instance, in KBC, and we have an agreement on that, we do that, and that gives a result. How can you make an end-to-end process flow into the DAO? So making decisions, then are going to work out that decision, and then see the result in the DAO. So the end-to-end process, and that's something it's not clear for me.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Rudy.
We can do it in the next half hour. Maybe I just give everyone who likes to leave like a chance to leave, and then we know who would like to stay as well. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting the.
Bye.
Hope to see you again.
Something.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I can go with my takeout.
Okay, great.
I come from traditional sociocracy, and I have a shallow knowledge of S3. And in all of this, I see a great opportunity to give an higher attention to processes. And I see it mainly, especially in high technological DAOs, where people come from a technological background with not a big training in the human factor, in social factor. Why human factor is so important in a situation where there is anonymity, there is people living in different cultures and so on. And so building trust is very difficult, in my opinion. The structure of S3, I think could be useful because you can build your governance based on patterns. You don't have something already built as in holacracy or traditional sociocracy.
Yeah. All right. Good thinking, Roberto. Thanks. Ulrich, do you want to say something? What is it you take along, or did you learn, or anything still hanging in your mind?
Well, I'm sticking around a bit longer, so I'm not yet heading out. Shall I still pick something, or?
Yeah, maybe it's good to hear everyone once in a while. Yeah. So what would you pick as a learning or a thought?
I really like Paul's explanation about if someone notices attention and brings it to the group. And by the way, S3, I know nothing about it. Everything's new. I first time here, so I totally lack everything. So for me, everything's new. So just that idea of how to deal with tension, that's so new to me, and so simple, but makes sense. And so I just like that a lot. So that's my takeaway.
Great. Awesome. All right.
For me, what I think is interesting is the process. And in the DAO, there's also a lot of talk about Web3 and contracts on the blockchain, and that process in a way incorporating into those contracts. So that you, I got a feel on how that can be done, but in practice, I don't see how. So, so it's this interesting new territory that we dive in on how a blockchain and decision making can be done in an automated way, and then still we are people. So that's that's a topic to explore for me. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I guess all of you still want to stay a bit longer, am I right? And
I'll go. Yeah, I'll go.
You will go. Okay. Thanks, Jeroen, for being here.
Thanks for the invite.
See you later.
Yeah, and organizing. Thanks, Jeremy, as well. You.
All right. I think both Jeremy and I have around 20 more minutes we want to spend on this. So maybe what's the remaining questions? What's the topics in our minds? What is it we want to talk about? Is there anything remaining with you, Rudy or Ulrich?
For me, there are just too many questions, so I'd like to just participate and take up as much as discussed, because for me, everything's a question.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would also like to double click on the idea that you're not alone in that experience, right? This question that sort of Jeroen brought in is kind of the thing, right? We are in a brand new possibility space that has never existed before. We have some notion that, like, I think what I recognize about S3 is, you know, what we're looking for is pro-social processes. And we understand from like a human to human process that those things exist, but how we bring that pro-social process and those design principles behind pro-social process into this technical field is like, that's the thing that we're trying to figure out how to do. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it would be amazing if we could, and it's going to take a couple of years probably, but try to find the both and more between both, because what S3 did and Sociocratie and Holacracy and all other stuff did fairly well is transcend the autocratic hierarchy or the majority voting or these kind of things, or so they transcended that by bringing in consent, which we know how to do in, let's say, small physical organizations. And then there's the blockchain with and the smart contracting and Web 3.0 with all those possibilities of both facilitating as securing processes and agreements. And then I was kind of surprised to discover that most DAOs are making decisions in a, for people like me, old-fashioned way. And on the other hand, there's not much physical organizations who have secure ways to even document their agreements and stick to them. And so I think that's a both and more where we can both learn from each other. And I think the combination could be very powerful. Yeah. But then there's also the question, which I don't think we can answer, but like the rich get more rich and the poor get more poor. And you see the same thing happening in the DAO space or the crypto space in a way, differently, but still. And are we as human beings on average ethical enough to start even touching on these things, or I don't know, question mark?
And I'll jump into this fray, into this snake pit for sure. So I exist in this subculture of subculture, right? So DAOs, Web3 is a subculture. The portion of that subculture that I think is the most interesting is exactly the space that's really trying to tackle this around regenerative finance, which is sort of the combination of using these these financial tools to fund impact projects that may not have a business model, and also the sort of post-capitalist frame that has a lot to do with activating community currencies and creating sort of walled commons, friction, networks of less friction of collaboration, and how we can use those tools to actually circumnavigate this problem, which I think is extraordinarily relevant here and now, right? Where, whether we know it or not, like we're in the midst of quite a tremendous financial crisis right now. And the availability of financial wealth is just going to continue to be more and more scarce for probably a good portion of definitely the rest of this year and next year as well. So in an environment where financial wealth is continuously more scarce, how can we use technology to sidestep all of that and recognize that, like, just because financial wealth is less available doesn't mean that my creativity and my collaborative potential has decreased whatsoever, right? So to be able to use those tools to try and explore, like, well, how I mean, this event is another good example. Like, so we're not using much financial wealth, but we're generating some new thoughts and cross-pollinating and learning together. Like, so, all right, the technology works to do that. If it works to do that, what can become possible if we can coordinate well enough?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we have the technology, Jeremy, what hold us back to make a smart contract to set up consent? I think technically it's not that difficult to achieve.
Well, I think like so many things, the comes back to the driver, right? So, like, do we have a clear driver to accomplish that? Like, is there a motivating force or energy in the spread between the way things are and the way things could be that gives us enough oomph to say, oh, that's actually a thing that's worth doing? And on the basis of that, like, are we coming up with a DAO idea right here, Rudy? Like, do we develop a smart contract around consent decision making? That could be sick as fuck, like, for real. To basically offer a standard set of mechanisms that you can imprint your driver, something along those lines, and have a pretty clear step-by-step process that the technology just sort of moves you through to come to some form of agreement. That could be incredible.
Wow, yeah.
But only for new DAOs or a minority of the existing DAOs, right? Because if something like that would exist today and I was a governance I would be owning much governance tokens, I wouldn't vote for this new system, right? Because I would lose power.
Truly.
Yeah. So
truly.
But I guess if we're a new DAO or we're very ethical people, then we could engage in such a way. But
yeah, but if you have a hierarchy in a DAO, Jeff, you can say the highest circle, if you call it the circle, is responsible for some governance, and they give power to another circle to solve some drivers.
Yeah, but if I understand correctly, and I'm trying to look at you now, Jeremy, that if there is a small subcircle in a DAO, then still other people with governance tokens can come and influence their decisions, right? Or not?
Yes and no. So it depends on a lot of different things. Okay. So if to use the example of gravity, right? So gravity is asking for funding for 6 months of operations. So once that funding request is, we've got 6 months of runway to just do whatever we think is it makes sense for our group. at the end of that 6 months, like we'll be back here again, like we have a conversation to be made, like then for sure, like if somebody who had lots of governance authority wanted to come and argue with us in the forum and say, hey, but like total reorganization and the way you guys do things is required if you want these funds, then that's the thing.
That way, yeah.
But I mean, I think there's like a seductive quality that, from my perspective, like pro-social tools, I'm all about selling the sexiness of like, hey, would you like a better way to get more shit done? Like, regardless of whether it's in the interest of my governance authority, like my sense of optimism is that my buy-in to the project that governance authority is over is actually a higher allegiance, right? That I would much rather see the success of the project than, you know, and maybe this is my own, you know, earnest naivety speaking, right? That I would rather hold the success of the thing that we're trying to build together as more important than my narrow interest about being able to be in charge about how we do it.
Yeah.
But can I make a simple example, Jeremy? Suppose we are in a city in Mechelen, for instance, and there is a DAO saying, and the DAO is handled by the major, and the major say, okay, we make a sub-DAO or a sub-circle, saying in that neighborhood you can have 1,000 coins to do something around that driver. For instance, do I spend the coins on trees in the city or on other things? But you can decide as a neighborhood to handle, for instance, an amount of coins. And that could be a very nice example for a DAO. The members of the DAO are citizens, and those citizens are in a certain neighborhood, and they can have an amount of coins to spend, for instance, on things that they are.
So giving all the tax money back to the people to invest. That was a
no,
good
some amount, Jeff. Some amount.
Yeah,
Now it's very difficult.
Yeah,
If a major say we are going to redesign your street, and they do it itself, and they spend also a lot of money to do that. But if you are saying we give that money on a certain neighborhood, they can decide by themselves, and by this they can decide by consent decision making. And that would be a very, very difference.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is one of those like most interesting spaces, right? So I think about, like, again, for me the meme or the idea that I'm most excited about is this whole thing around regeneration. How do we compost the way that we organize right now, and through some form of creative destruction, like come up with new ways of organizing ourselves. I think this example that I like to tell the story of, like, the Amstel River here in Amsterdam, right? If the Amstel River, you know, if I wanted to clean it up, you know, my options are pretty limited. You know, I could go for direct action, just start picking up trash. I could knock on the door of the municipality and, you know, maybe die before I figure out who the right person to talk to about getting something done is. But for sure, I could also make use of this technology to organize people into a project that people are just funding, you know, in this sort of crowdfunding type of way that maybe the municipality would be able to plug into. And what's very interesting is that it's this fusion in combination. Like, my neighbor might want to put $50 into that pool of, you know, pick up trash out of the river money because he lives next door to me. He's got very aligned interests. He wants to have a clean river. But it could also be that the Amstel Hotel right downstream has a very clear value proposition and can say, oh, well, if you guys can clean up this river, we have done the math. We think it's worth, you know, an extra €1.5 million of revenue per year. We'll happily try €5,000 to just see if you guys can create some impact, with a very clear possibility space of us scaling that up to 500,000 per year, right? And having that type of fusion between my neighbor buys in for 50, and then he is able to sort of ride the rising tide of this increasing funds, enables us to not only fund this project, but also opens up the possibility of it being also a speculative vehicle for people who want to jump in on projects that they think matter to them. And you know, and exercise the governance authority, participate in a very hands-on way with the execution of that project. So the possibility space from like a local community organization is very, very ripe. I just came back from this conference in Baricha, where they're networking basically 30 different very local on the ground community development projects with reforestation to try and regenerate this dead river that's also in the space. It's, I mean, the sky is the limit, man. I think we can actually do it. I mean, the hour is late and, you know, the stakes are high, but we've got ourselves an opportunity here.
But the latter one of the citizens actually also doesn't need a shared bank account. Somehow it feels like, but this exists already, no? We don't need blockchain to clean up the Amstel River, do we?
I mean, yes and no, for whatever reason, right? What I think is interesting is like the transparency and the immediacy. So, right. So for sure, there's a municipality that you could go to, like, get the municipality. You could lobby the voorzitter in the gemeente to make the thing happen. For totally, that's available. But the innovation is the directness. So number one, these contracts and the ability to be very transparent in the way these things are organized, but also like the immediacy, like the steps between I want to have this thing done and I'm going to create an enterprise that does it are 0 steps to me and actually the people doing the damn thing, right? The smart contract could look as simple as like validate through this webcam that you have picked up trash in the square in front of my house, and an automatic payment will be made to your bank account, basically. And that immediacy that right now is there's the municipality, and then there's a tender and a contract, and then there's a guy who does the job of actually picking up, you know, he's employed by the guy who won the contract. Like there's 6 steps at least in there between I want my neighborhood to be clean and the guy who's cleaning the neighborhood. But we can get rid of all of that, all of those middlemen with these smart contracts and just go, I want you to clean up the neighborhood. Well, I'll do that, and boom, direct transaction that enables us to scale and swell. I mean, obviously I'm excited. So we just.
I noticed that I'm in something DAO-like with almost everyone here. I'm with Uli in Spiral, with Jeff in the Sociocratie 3.0 meetups, and with Rudy in Kliman. And all of those things have some qualities of a DAO, though nothing with cryptocurrencies or blockchains, but it's all self-organized, make things happen, no hierarchy, organizations.
Great. All right, guys, looking at the time, I want to start wrapping up. So is there any very important last minute thing you want to share or ask? Rudy or Ulrich?
No, it was very interesting, Jeff, to join the meeting, and I think we must work on that DAO thing with S3. We did some experiments at KBC with DAOs, and there was always a voting mechanism to decide, and that was not okay. And also that circle thing was also not okay, but it starts to work out. So I'm looking forward to do some things with the DAOs.
All right, Great. Anything you want to say, Ulrich?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you to Anne for bringing me along, and to everyone, and also specifically Jeremy. Your explanation are so sharp and inspiring, sparkling. So my first contact with DAOs, and I'm really happy to have had that exposure here. Thank you.
Righteous. Thanks, man.
Great.
Thank you for being here.
I was going to say around the same thing as Ulrich. Thanks a lot, Jeremy, for wanting to invest in this and to prepare with Anna and myself and to be here and inspire us. It was great meeting you. So thank you for investing time and energy in this.
Oh, my pleasure, man. This is the thing, right? As you sort of illustrated, Anne, that's like, we're trying to do a bunch of shit. So let's get really good at like random constellations of people. Like, how do we just coordinate and collaborate and get shit done? Like, can we figure out what the shared language of collaboration looks like so that we can just, whatever needs to be done, wherever we're at, like, just do the thing. As we would say in the Web3 lingo, this is a space of memes. LFG, let's fucking go. Let's just do it.
All right, let's fucking go.
Okay.
All right, have a nice evening, all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
And
That's
talk
fun.
to you later.
Good.
All
All the
right.
best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.